to another very exciting and important session from my perspective at the 9th edition of the Goa Arts and Literature Festival. This is a highlight for me. Thank you both for being here. For several years, Manjushree Thapa has been one of my favorite writers. She's quite unique. I was actually told her yesterday, we don't have anyone like her from our part of the world, and every part of the world should have someone like her. She does a remarkable job with a wonderful work of novels. Manjushree now lives in Toronto, but most of her work is based or grounded in Nepal. And she is the author of 10 books of fiction, non-fiction and literary translation. Her latest novel is All of Us in Our Own Lives, which is set in the cynical, moneyed world of international aid in Nepal. The book is available outside. This continues also a long-standing connection the Goa Arts and Literature Festival has had with writers and artists and musicians from Nepal. So thank you so much for being with us, Manjushree. It's been several years that we've been trying to find a way to have Manjushree here, and she's finally come. So it's a big highlight of GALF 2018. Big hand for Manjushree Thapa. In conversation is Anurag Basnet. Anurag himself has done some really interesting work. This year, in the past year, he translated an absolutely fantastic book about travel writing, which you'll hear about tomorrow, which is written by Anil Kumar Yadav. I highly recommend it. I've written thousands of words about the book. Anurag is also the managing editor of one of India's great publishers, which is Speaking Tiger Books. He's been in the publishing industry for 12 years. Welcome, Anurag, and here's use this mic.
Thank you, Vivek, for having us here. The literary life. How does one define and how does one set boundaries around a literary life in a lived life, in a lived context is what I want to start with. And then as we progress with talk about non-fiction and fiction and see how that is planned.
Thank you for having me here. I'm really pleased to be here. I wanted to come for ages, and it's such an, from yesterday's keynote speeches onwards, it's been such a sort of rousing call for expression and civil liberties and all of these values that we hold dear. So I'm really pleased to be here. About your question, should I be doing this? So, in terms of your okay, so what constitutes a literary life? I think when I started out writing, so I was very young, and I had just moved back to Nepal from the United States, and I found Nepal intensely confusing, and I started writing as a way to sort of this is better. So I started to write, and at that time it was still very much in fashion for fiction writers to write non-fiction. So someone like Salman Rushdie would write about Nicaragua, or a lot of Amitabh Ghosh was writing both fiction and non-fiction. So it didn't. I suppose later on, all of these genres became more marketed and more rigid in their boundaries. But for me, it was really helpful to think that I could write anything. So my first book was a travel log within Nepal to Mustan, which is a northern part that borders Tibet. And it was, I've been reading a lot of Kapczynski, a lot of sort of other non-fiction writers, a lot of travel writers, Bruce Chaplin, and all of this. And so I really started out that way, with a very romantic version, which I think a lot of younger writers do, which is just that I want to write. That was the feeling, I want to write. And then, of course, the subject matter that you find as you continue to write, the subject matter that you choose, your focus, your style, all of these choices that you go on to make are what start to define you and help you find your voice. So I feel like one of the things that was really definitional in my life was that Nepal that was exactly when I had gone back to Nepal, and suddenly the whole country changed, and its stories changed, and its own sense of self changed, and all of us became citizens instead of subjects, and there was this new sense of empowerment. All of the civil rights movements, like women's rights, Dalit rights, indigenous rights, LGBT movements, all of these started up, and so and also the Maoist movement. So a lot of movements started up. So it became the subject matter that I sort of went into, whether after that I started to write fiction, but also stayed with nonfiction. So that I felt really blessed to be part of a society where the stories are endless and we have to be told.
Now, the most important fragments, the traveler that I'm just talking about is I think one of the best travel writing that I've read from the subcontinent since I was a child. I was still in school, I think, when it came out. But I'd like to talk a bit about Forget Kathmandu, because that really is your best known work. And it stays still. I mean, it was first published in 2001, and it was first published in 2001, and it's been 17 years now that it's been on print. And I was reading it recently yet again, and I find that it still stays fresh. Not just in terms of the writing, which is there, because it's such a mix of travel, there's history, there's memoir, but in terms of the issues that it talks about, in terms of the politics that it talks about, and what do you think is there? Is there, in a sense, Forget Kathmandu encapsulates the sort of the static nature of how politics has been in Nepal and Kathmandu since 2001. So what do you have to say about that?
So one thing I want to say before I answer your question immediately is, around the time I began to write, so my first novel was set in the time of a general election, and I wrote Forget Kathmandu. And I started it very much after the 2001 Royal Family Massacre, which was a truly bewildering experience for a lot of Nepalis, and a time when our entire sense of the nation, I think, shifted irrevocably. And it was the beginning of the end of the monarchy. But for me to get to that point where I was writing that book really depended on having something that I think fewer and fewer writers get, which is a chance from a publisher to develop your voice. So I felt really lucky when I published my first novel. I was really an outsider to Delhi. I really didn't know how to break into publishing. I kept sending my manuscript cold, and I'd never heard back again. And I really didn't know how to break into it. So through Pushpat Singh, I met Ravi Singh, and he was at Penguin, and he was a young editor then, and I was a young writer then. And so we sort of, I feel like I sort of grew up with him, where he made space for stories from Nepal, which was unusual at that time. And now there are more and more Nepali writers, several are in this room, Pravinath Kari and Shiva Shah and others. But it was really rare then. So I feel like to get to a point where I could write Forget Kathmandu, I already had this sort of immense support and really great editing support, which is really, now as an older writer, I really value that a lot. I feel like that's the most precious thing a writer can get. So Forget Kathmandu was very much in response to the implosion of the monarchy, which happened at a time when the Maoist movement was ratcheting up. And so instead of the Maoists who did want to end the monarchy, or so they said in their demands, instead of them taking the monarchy down, the monarchy took itself down in a way that replayed the old massacres from history. Shiva Shah's novel that was released today is about an earlier, the Godbarwa massacre from 1846. We were living in a time of televised news, it was before all of the cell phone and all of this, or the social media phrase, but it was a time when all of us felt thoroughly modern and did not expect it to go that way. You know, it was such a medieval, a replay of a medieval drama that, and it felt Shakespearean and tragic, and you know, it was, you know, the past was not the past at that moment, and we realized that, you know, this was something that was untenable in a democratic state that wanted to be secular, that wanted to be modern, that wanted to join the world. So I think the book had staying power because it captured that moment of disjunction in Nepal, where, you know, it was, we were living in the middle of, you know, there's the Maoist movement, there's the monarchy, and the disarrayed liberal space, the democratic space, which was under siege, and I think in many ways remains under siege. I actually feel very sad right now being in Nepal or being in India and observing India and seeing India going through something similar in a different way, where the liberal space is really in danger.
So, coming to fiction, you started with tutor of history, and that was again seventh generation and was informed by the politics of that time. And from the tutor of history to Seasons of Flight, and now to All of Us in Our Own Lives, which fiction, your fiction has reflected societal realities, but with this, you know, with a sense of the individual that is always very varied and refreshing, but it's always underpinned by politics, by ideas of equality, and, you know, by larger social ideas throughout. How has that evolved and changed from book to book? If you could tell us a bit about that.
You know, it's interesting because I feel like I'm still evolving as a writer and making choices differently than I did earlier in my life. But one of the formative experiences for me was studying in an American creative writing program, where the focus is very intensively on craft and on individual stories. So at that time when I was doing my MFA, it really was the experience of being among American peers who were writing stories about individuals in maybe one relationship, a romantic relationship or a family relationship, but the larger society and you know, politics, social issues, and certainly not the nation. Like none of that appeared in the stories. So it was very, very individual. But fortunately, I went back to Nepal, and Nepal has a very strong literary tradition of social realism, as does a lot of South Asia. So a lot of the literature that I began to read in Nepal was really formed by social realist traditions, like, you know, Maxim Gorky's work in translation, or Lushan's work in translation, or a lot of the Hindi work that Nepali writers were reading. And so I found that it was really helpful for me to be in a literary milieu where everyone was writing about social and political issues, and you were expected to, it was normal to do so. And as a writer, you were given this perch of an intellectual, whether you deserved it or not, to be able to pronounce on matters, on social and political issues. So for me, it became really a blend of those two things, where the social and political were important, but not at the cost of the individual stories. And so right now, I think it's been the same mix all the way through my fiction, but I feel like the personal stories, or the personal voice, is getting more and more inward, and certainly my subjects are becoming more and more female. I'm more interested in women's stories at this point than I was earlier in my life. So those changes are happening, but that's the general. But can I ask you a question? I mean, yes, I can, because I have the mic. Which is, so as a publisher, you know, now been publishing a lot of writers, also from Nepal, but also from India and elsewhere. How do you see a young writer starting up now, or maybe not even a young writer, but writers who are starting up now? Do you see that they will be allowed to have, this 15-year period of developing their voice and growing as a writer and sort of evolving?
As an editor, as an editor, not so much as a publisher, but definitely as an editor, that is the ideal scenario. That is the ideal scenario for me, because like you said, as the writer grows, as an editor grows, so does the writer, right? And it works both ways. It's a mutual relationship. Those are the writers that we're looking, that one hopes for, that one looks for all the time. That someone with whom you can build a close relationship, and as they grow, as they mature as writers, that relationship continues, because I also grow more, and I also understand more. And it's also intensely psychological, or very interconnected psychologically. So in recent times, in my personal experience, the example that comes closest to comes up for me is who's here, and so that is an instance of an evolving relationship that I can give, because he and I are both the same age. His concerns and my concerns match, which is I think always important. But at the same time, it's very satisfying to engage with someone at the level of words, at the level of ideas, but also at the level of the psyche, over the course of books, which each of which have their own life. So whether it is a novel or a book of short stories, or like his new novel, which is interconnected short stories. So yeah, those are the ideal scenarios that as an editor I imagine and I fantasize about. It doesn't always happen. There are some authors who are just one book in it, there are some who are many. So but yeah, it's something that I do look forward to quite a bit. So I'll put you in a bit of a spot here. You've always lived, you've gone to study in the US, you've come back, and most of your books have been written in Nepal while you were here, or they've been informed by your lived experience in the country, which I imagine is of a certain kind. But now you've moved to Canada, and more importantly, you have taken Canadian citizenship. How has that impacted, or has it impacted your understanding or your lived experience of Nepal? How does that inform your writing now? I'm not talking so much in terms of writing fiction, but if you're writing non-fiction, if you're writing a book that you are using in a sense to explain Kathmandu and Nepal to you and to others, how would that shift in geography and physical location affect you?
It's something that I'm struggling with. It is, so the downside of living in Nepal is that you are constantly busy with either social movements, literary movements, or other activities. It's a very dense society, and it's very hard to protect your isolated time to write. So that is a challenge in Nepal. But the upside is that material is all around you, and anywhere you look, you're constantly inspired. So that was how I began to write. That's how I developed as a writer, and it completely, Nepal has fed my work. I feel really indebted to Nepali society because it's a very generous society in that way. People are very open about their stories. They're very sort of expressive. So I moved to what I think of as the geological and also political opposite of Kathmandu, which is Toronto, which is very stable and also very flat physically, and it's desperately flat and also desperately stable. So for me, it's been a little bit of a balancing act that I haven't figured out, which is, so what I have is a lot of time to write, which is what I wanted. What I don't have is any inspiration around me. I mean, Canada is full of stories, but they're not my story. Those are not the stories I want to tell. There are other Canadian writers doing a fine job of that. So it's a bit of a riddle right now. I'm working on a novel right now, and I've done, so I've looked at anthropologists or, these professors who teach in the West, and they come and do field work and then do their research, and then they go back and then they put their piece of research together, which is a model that I've never worked out of, but now I'm working out of. And I'm not sure it's going to work, but that's what I'm doing. So I guess at some point I'll either have to spend more time in Nepal if that's not going to work, which I do want to. But the other shift I've made is that I love nonfiction writing and want to continue doing it, but I don't think I would do it from afar. I would have to do it as reportage and be there. I haven't done as much, whereas I have done more fiction writing because there's a sort of score of stories that I still want to write. So I've got this novel, I've got 2 or 3 other books in my head that are waiting their turn. So for all of that, I feel like fiction is the right form. But yeah, the jury's out. I'll see. I mean, I think some readers have told me that, no, it's not going to be good anymore if you're not living here. I never wanted to be an expatriate writer. Like, I never wanted to write from far away, so it is something I just wonder.
So now, Sushi, I think talk a bit about your translation work as well, because it's something that's simmered for a while. Manju's translated a collection of pieces and excerpts from Nepal, which was published a while ago. The last part of translation is There's a Carnival Today by a Nepali writer called Anurag Basnet. Anurag he passed away unfortunately at the beginning of this year. Anurag Basnet was a literary theorist, a novelist, a short story writer. Arguably one of the most influential Nepali writers of all time, and unfortunately perhaps also the only one who's had that sort of overarching, far-reaching influence in a language. And Manju and I, we've been discussing her translating the novel, and it kindly happened last year. So why don't you tell us a bit about why you came to Anurag and Azamani Dasa, that's the Nepali title of the book, in the first place, and for someone who's used to engaging with the language firsthand, what the experience of translating was like.
So this connects a little bit with the last question, which is how can I engage with Nepal or this part of the world from a distance? The translation is something that I can do, and it's something that I hope to do more of. So I had read Anurag Rai when I started to write myself. He came from Darjeeling to Kathmandu to launch my very first novel in 2001, and he was a huge influence on me. He really was someone who made me realize that as an English writer, I mustn't have arrogance because the Nepali writers are writing much better stories. So it was really someone who opened up my eyes to Nepali literature. So he had inaugurated that book, and I had asked him for the right to translate that book into English back then. And of course, translation is a very difficult task in two ways. One is just the language that anyone who translates knows that, the technical aspects of translation from one language to another is very challenging. So I had done a lot of stories and poems and shorter pieces, but never a novel length work. So I was a bit nervous about that and sort of held off for a long time because of that. But also just the pragmatics of translation are very difficult. So writing is already not a lucrative living, and translation is even worse. You just do it because you want to do it and you have to do it. It's very hard to make it big. So I was lucky because when Anurag, I knew that you were going to be editing it, and you're from Darjeeling. And the Nepali from Darjeeling is different from the Nepali in Nepal, and even within Nepal there's a large variation. So I really only got the confidence to embark on it once you were going to be the editor of it. And I actually put him in my contract. I insisted I'm not going to translate this book unless he edits it. So I felt really lucky that way. I had other friends in Nepal who are very familiar with the Eastern Nepali usage of the Nepali language and with Darjeeling. And so I finally decided to just do it because I realized the longer I wait, it'll just slip by. So yeah, it was not as scary as I thought. I thought it was going to take about 2 or 3 years. 6 months for the actual translation and about but it was the editor so that was a big deal, but it's also what I would see now as the most exciting thing that's happening now in India, certainly in publishing, is that it seems like a lot of the English writers in India have come to this realization too, that their peers who are writing in the regional languages are writing incredible work that they could also want to translate. So I think the growth of translation is, for me, really exciting because I would, love to read what Carol Morgan is writing or all of that. So as a publisher, I hope you're going to continue to not just you're a translator yourself, but also to support translation.
More of an observation than a question. In terms of choice of language, as we Anurag Basnet was a professor, a teacher of English, and he chose to write in Nepali. You as a writer have made your Nepali is also as a choice of language. Okay? When a writer chooses to write in a certain language, he also chooses a readership. Right? In what way, or in which ways do you think that shapes? To come back to the last topic of discussion here. In what ways is a literary life shaped that way? Okay? Because Anurag Basnet has a huge sort of following. Many people have read him, many people profess to have read him, and have not read him because obviously of the sort of myth, of this almost mythical status that is writing is too dense and difficult to read. It's myth, of course. But the choice of language limits you in a sense to a particular geography, to a particular demographic. So how has that choice worked out for you in terms of writing in English?
I think Jerry mentioned this yesterday, or maybe it was a private conversation, but English is the power of language, the language of power in Nepal. So in terms of a very small set though. So it's the power of being able to communicate with the neighboring countries, with the diplomats, with the aid workers, with tourists, with foreigners. But it's really not a language that has a life of its own in Nepal. Not much of a life of its own, unlike in India. So you can have this phenomenon of someone like Anurag Basnet, who is worshipped right all over the Nepali-speaking world, which is a decent-sized world. That's 40 million speakers of Nepali worldwide who worship him. And in India, he had been given all of the recognition. So he was a Sahitya Academy winner. He had all of the stature that India could give him, but he was not widely read because he hadn't been translated much. Only a few of his stories had been translated into English. So for me, the choice when I was younger was to start to write in Nepali and that involved reacquiring Nepali. But I decided at some point that first, life is too short to write in two languages, and then also I felt that I was going to be more useful to Nepali literature if I translated it instead into English and sort of opened up that world to English readers. So for me, and this is something I think I sent you some very praised emotional letters around the time when Anurag Basnet's book was published, that no one will take this away from us, that we brought his work to an Indian readership, which is a big thing. I mean, he's a huge figure in Indian literature, but people had not been able to read him. So I think, yeah, we do make our choices of language, and that shapes us. For me, it really, translating is not a side thing that I've done. It's something that absolutely is part of my worldview of what a writer can do or should do, or would grow from doing themselves.
So in terms of further translations, I do know that you are intending to.
Thank you very much, Manjushree Thapa and Anurag Basnet, for